Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We are going to start with Kadyn Proctor. Some very interesting news came out about him. Looks like he might be heading back into the transfer portal, which opens a lot of questions about the future of the transfer portal. Then we're going to get into some different things about the Pac-12, some new developments there. The Pac-12 teams have been giving something of a lifeline, so huge news there. Then we're going to get into some breakout players for 2024 on the defensive side of the ball. We've done this a couple of times before, but now it's time for part 3 because there are so many people that we could get to. And then finally, we have a Hot Take Thursday, and it has everything to do with the coaching world, so definitely stay tuned for that at the very end. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all that we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions on the screen or see your comments on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all, because you get to see your questions or comments on the screen, and we get to have a fun back and forth here. So again, that's GSMCPodcast.net. But let's jump right in, because there has been so much stuff happening across the entire country. And one of the things that has happened this week that has kind of set the college football Twitter world on fire has been Kadyn Proctor. He is the offensive tackle that was originally committed to Iowa at the very beginning of recruitment, decided to flip to Alabama late on, played a good amount, or was a transfer over from Iowa in the first place. Excuse me, I apologize for that. But played last year with Alabama, was a huge contributor on the offensive line there, was a big tackle for them. And this offseason, when all of the coaching changes happened and when everything kind of went crazy around Tuscaloosa, they decided that he was going to move back to Iowa and join the Hawkeyes once again. So a very interesting decision there, obviously, but it sounds like he wants to change paths once again. He, all about 2 months into his time at Iowa, has decided he is likely going to leave after the spring practice period, once the spring portal opens, and probably return to Alabama as it seems. So very interesting. There were some rumors that he was on spring break with some of the other Alabama players, so maybe they were in his ear telling him that, Kalen DeBoer and his new staff is actually a very, very good thing and everything's rolling really smoothly. Maybe they were trying to talk him back into coming back to Alabama, and it seems like it worked, because it looks like he will be going back to Tuscaloosa, joining the Crimson Tide once again. And it obviously presents a pretty clear problem with the way that the portal works. And it's not necessarily anything against Kadyn Proctor. I'm all for a kid trying to figure out where he fits best. But there is a slippery slope here that could open up if things like this keep happening. So one of the big things is, obviously, with this, he has been in and out of the portal at least a couple of times in a couple of months. And it's very interesting for a number of reasons, but mainly because it's not really something we've seen in the past. We've always had people that have bounced around maybe year to year, but not a lot of jump in one opening in 1 year and then jump right back out the next opening and go back to the old school. So this is definitely a very new concept, and I think it's something that maybe more players will start to do, and it is utilizing the transfer portal in a way that I don't think it was ever conceived to be used. I think, obviously, there are great things that have come out of the portal. The best things about this sport in a lot of ways, a group of 5 guy getting his chance at one of the big-time schools is always great. A Power 5 guy moving down a level maybe to get some more playing time is great. A kid even just finding his new place in the Power 5 or group of 5 that just makes him happier and has him in a better headspace is all great. The problem comes when it's used kind of willy-nilly. It's used in whatever fashion the players see fit, and it's used kind of as a go-between in between seasons. It's not necessarily about picking a team the first time you do. It's about essentially free agency. So being a free agent for as long as possible, and while Kadyn Proctor is more within his power to do whatever he wants with his future, and that's kind of the way the transfer portal is set up right now. It does create an issue because I talked about this earlier this week, or maybe even into last week, but player power in this sport is a huge topic of conversation, and it's something that is super important. We have to be able to empower the players to make a little bit of NIL money, be able to transfer, do all the things that they should have the power to do, and make decisions over the future of their, collegiate career, or maybe even their pro career in the long run. But at the end of the day, the portal should be used for one-way movements. It should be used when a kid really feels like he needs to find a new place to play, and he jumps to another school and stays there at least for a year. But when it's being used as kind of, the best way I can kind of describe it is just putting your name into a free agency pool and kind of just letting things happen as they may, it becomes a little bit more dangerous. And it goes back to the thing that I said earlier, where the transfer portal, NIL, or any of the problems that are plaguing college football right now, all of those things with a crystalline and known structure, I think, are good things. I think the transfer portal makes a lot of sense if you have a good structure to it. I think NIL is a great thing for college sports if it has a structure to it. But right now, we're kind of dealing with it as kind of the Wild West and allowing a lot of players to have a lot of power, but not necessarily the understanding or the structure to wield that power effectively and wield it for their best interest. Because in this example, obviously, he decided to transfer after Nick Saban retired, and a lot of the coaching staff changed. Scott Huff came in from Washington and then left and went right back to Washington to join the Seahawks. So there was a lot of uncertainty. So I cannot blame him at all for deciding to jump in the portal then. But there is something to be said about, sticking it out at least through spring, figuring out what this new coaching staff has in store, and figuring out if this is the best place for you, because obviously he didn't feel that way when they first got there. He didn't feel that way when Nick Saban was walking out the door, but maybe he does now. And maybe, when he joins back up, maybe he's going to feel a little foolish for jumping in during spring. So there's all these different consequences that will be coming of this, and my hope is that this moment is not used as something that, should be done by a lot of players. I hope this isn't something that spurs more players to say, okay, if there's a coaching change, I'll jump in the portal, I'll go to a school, but if things start to work out at that old school, then I can always jump back in and roll on back there, because the reality is not everyone is Kadyn Proctor. Not everyone is a remarkable offensive tackle that is going to get tons of draft hype and will start pretty much anywhere in the country and all of this stuff, because there are tons of guys that will likely do this and at the end of the day be sitting in the portal or be at a new school that they're not overly happy at, or try to go back to their old school and they won't have it because that's not necessarily the way you want to do business. So this is obviously a isolated incident right now, and I think Kadyn Proctor, as of right now, has not caused any big problems. He's just, obviously the people in Iowa are less than happy, but at the end of the day, he made his own decision, and it really only affects Iowa and Alabama, and that's all well and good. The problem becomes when other guys follow that lead, or when it becomes a thing that just people do, where every season, when the season ends, you jump in the portal, you see what's out there, and then maybe you jump right back to school. And I know there are some schools that don't really allow that. I think Clemson would be chief among them with the way that Dabo handles the portal. I know Steve Sarkisian has talked about if you jump in the portal, you're pretty much done with Texas. So there are some schools that will not take you back, and I worry that some of these kids are going to view the portal as kind of use at your leisure type of thing instead of a break glass in case of emergency type of thing, because the portal was always there to help student athletes and to let them find where they need to be. But it wasn't necessarily there to just be a, whenever you want to jump on in, and you can spit out at a new school. And if you want to go back in 2 months later, you're more than welcome. I don't think that was ever the intention of it. That was never what they wanted to be executed. But where we've come as a sport and the way that the NCAA's overlooking of the sport has slowly been kind of deteriorized has led to this, and has led to the transfer portal with a lot of openings, with a lot of question marks, and it allows things like this to happen. And I hope that behind the scenes, this, or any of the number of things that we have talked about on this show have triggered stuff in the background to get a crystalline structure in place and get a governing body in place, because when we look at the sport, in 10 years, it could be entirely different. It could be two major conferences, pretty much the AFC and the NFC of the NFL, with, other conferences just kind of scrounging for scraps at the very bottom. So there is that possibility. But there also is the possibility where you have all these incredible people in the halls of college football that, Nick Saban just retired. You have other retired coaches. You have former players. You have tons of people to choose from. And at some point, those people have to get together and put together a real plan for this sport. Because whether it's, Kadyn Proctor or the next guy or, the next 10 guys, someone's going to get hurt by this, the way that this sport is currently working. Someone's going to get hurt by the lack of structure, by the lack of rules and regulations around, especially NIL, but the transfer portal as well, because as we know, they kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. So it's one of those things that, as of right now, there's not a huge problem necessarily, I wouldn't say. I don't think Kadyn Proctor, ruined the sport by doing what he did, or necessarily did anything wrong, because at the end of the day, he made a decision at one point where a staff was walking out, and if, from my point of view, that fully made sense. Going back to a little bit closer to home, going to a school that you're familiar with, all of that makes sense to me. Jumping back in, it just creates a precedent that I hope does not continue to happen. I hope that people learn from this and they say, oh, well, he obviously should have stuck it out through spring, at least seen what this staff had to offer, and then made his decision. I hope it's not, wow, you can use it willy-nilly, you can use it however you want. That sounds pretty good. So it's one of those things that this particular circumstance, in this particular situation, I don't necessarily have too big of a problem with. I wish that he would have stayed in Tuscaloosa to figure out what the new staff had in store before jumping back to Iowa, so you could, avoid all of this. But at the end of the day, I don't necessarily have a problem with him making the decision to go back to Alabama. I just worry that the precedent that's being set, especially in the transfer portal world, is a little bit dangerous. And this is kind of the quintessential example of that type of change that we've gone under in college football, and the path that we might be going down if we're not careful about the way that we talk to our kids about transfer portal and all of that type of stuff. So Kadyn Proctor, more than in his power to make the decision best for his future. I hope that he gets back to Tuscaloosa and has a great career, because he's a wildly talented player. I just hope that other players don't necessarily follow his lead, I suppose, on this example. So definitely a lot of stuff happening there. I'm sure there will be a couple more mix-ups there, but at the end of the day, it looks like he is heading back to Tuscaloosa, and hopefully he puts his feet in the ground and doesn't move for the rest of his college career, because I know that Tuscaloosa, or Bama fans, would absolutely love to have him there. Pretty much any school would. So more power to him. Happy that he is hopefully going back to a place where he will be happy and, be able to do the things that he wants to do. But I just hope that other players don't follow that lead, I suppose, is the best way I can put it. But we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Pac-12, or the Pac-2 if you want to call it that. They got thrown a little bit of a lifeline recently, so we will jump into all of that after this break.